So let's understand Trumpism, and first let's dispense with some of the nonsense, right? Because there are still a lot of people who would have us believe that everything I just said, however much it might be pretty rhetorically, that it isn't really fair, because after all, it's not right of me to suggest that Trumpism is first and foremost a white nationalist project. That it's not, oh, I hadn't said that yet, but I just did. But that's not fair, Tim, because, these are folks who are first and foremost motivated by their economic anxiety. Here's how we know that that isn't true. Right? First, we know it's not true because if Trumpism were rooted mostly in economic anxiety, black and brown folks would have been lined up around the block to vote for him, right? Because when it comes to economic anxiety, people of color are the ones who always, both quantitatively and qualitatively, have a disproportionate share of it. Trumpism is predicated on a few things in particular that we've seen before. The first is, of course, nostalgia. It is first and foremost a nostalgic movement, right? That's why the hat says, "Make America Great Again," right? It doesn't say, "Let's make America great for the first time," because we really haven't ever gotten it right before. Not only because that won't fit on the hat, but because the people who crafted the slogan wanted to appeal, much like the Tea Party did before them, to a nostalgic past. And I know a little something about nostalgia because, like I said, I'm from the South, and we do that with grits. Like, that is what we do, right? I mean, we had that song. You've heard the song, right? Wish I were in the land of cotton. Old times there are not forgotten. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. And if y'all think the South lost the Civil War, you haven't been paying attention. Right? Just telling you the truth, see? Sometimes victories take a really long time to manifest and materialize, and folks go to sleep. But that's what we do. We do nostalgia. And the whole nation under Trumpism is gripped by that, the notion that once upon a time we were great. Now, they'll never tell you when you ask them when, right? Because I do that, because I'm pushy that way and obnoxious. And I'll say, well, when was it great? And they always are like, well, because they know any answer they give makes them sound like a jerk, right? They can't give a good answer they can't say the 50s, because then they're going to be like, oh yeah, wait, They can't say the 1911 teens or something, because children are working in mines and factories. They know that sounds terrible, but in a way that's what they're thinking, right? That we want to go back to this age of supposed innocence when everything was wonderful. And so nostalgia makes up a big piece of it, and that's nothing new. The second thing Trumpism is predicated on is a backlash to real, or at least perceived gains, but often real gains made by people of color.
Wagwan. Welcome back to my YouTube space. I greet you with love. Today I'm diving into a powerful truth that has been voiced by someone who has used his whiteness to challenge the very system that gave it power. His name is Tim Weiss, the professor. And in a fiery, razor-sharp speech, he dissected the mindset behind Trumpism and white Americans' obsession with nostalgia. And trust me, family, he didn't hold back. This speech that I'm going to play to you today, it is something that I'm speaking about some facts. And I'll say this. He's calling out how Trumpism thrives on nostalgia in a realistic memory of history, but whitewashed selective visions in the past. He talked about the slogan of Make America Great Again, as he notes, intentionally vague because it appeals to an emotional, idolized version of the past that was never truly equitable, especially not for black people, indigenous people, or other marginalized groups. He asked, when was America great? And Tim Weiss, being from the South, uses the Southern culture obsession with the glory days of the Confederacy to draw a parallel. So, I'll say this. The professor points out there that although the Confederacy lost the Civil War, the ideology of white supremacy, systematic racism, and equality didn't die. They evolved and repackaged themselves in new form like Trumpism. So he's warning that racist systems don't need to win battles loudly. They win over time if people fall asleep or become complacent. So when Tim Weiss says they will never tell you when referring to when America was great, he's exposing the how vague and dishonesty nostalgia is. So when you hear about nostalgia, to those who don't understand, nostalgia is a feeling of longing for the past, especially for a time that someone remembers as better, simpler, or happier. And two ways nostalgia shows up is thinking about your childhood with love, or longing for a time when white people had total power. Longing for a time when white people had total power. Saying America, make America great again, without thinking about who was suffering in that great time. Ignoring racism, sexism, slavery, or colonialism in the name of traditional. That is what Tim Weiss is meaning here when he say nostalgia. So before I go down to this video with my commentary, I want you to listen to this clip first, and then I'll come back with more.
But here's the thing, like for the last 8 years, those of us who do this work, myself very much included, we have had to go around this country and convince people that racism was still a thing. Like for 8 years, that was sort of the subtext of our job. That was our job description. Like, no, really, it's still a thing. And we didn't have to convince people of color of this, but white folks sometimes need a little coaxing. You know, it takes us, we're sort of slow on that stuff. So we've had to be working really hard to convince white folks that these kind of discussions or, you know, this kind of stuff was even necessary. So here's the silver lining in the current situation. Yeah, I don't have to do that work anymore, right? I mean, there's something to be said. See, did I sell it, or is it just, it was sort of cynical, but like funny cynical, right? I don't really have to pull teeth anymore because I think we sort of get it now increasingly, or at least some do, not all, right? It's sort of like, and I know sports analogies are way overused, but I'm from the South, so you're gonna have to indulge me for a minute. It's sort of like back in the day, and if you've always lived on the West Coast, you may not know this, but those of us who live in the Central or the Eastern time zone, on Sundays when CBS was the only network that showed NFL football, right? They had in the South, it was the noon game and the 3 game, and the 3 o'clock game would always bleed over into what? 60 minutes, right? It would bleed. Now, if you're on the West Coast, you got to see it in real time because they were starting the games at, 8 o'clock or 5 in the morning or whatever they were starting them out here. But for us, the 3 o'clock game would always get over around 6:15, all right? And then the announcer would break in, like a little voiceover, and they would say, "Now back to your regularly scheduled programming." That's sort of what the election of Donald Trump is, y'all, and I need you to understand it is back to your regularly scheduled programming. All this other stuff for 8 years, that was like D.L. Hughley said this better than I did. He said it's sort of like going to a Broadway show, and that's the intermission, right? And then the intermission's over, and it's like back to the show, right? And the reason it's important for me to say this is I think in the last several months, people have been paralyzed by this fear, understandable, but a fear that is rooted, at least in part, in the idea that this is a really new deviation, right? That this is some new, uniquely dangerous moment in American history, right? And one of the things that I do want to say that perhaps, I don't know if it's optimistic or just trying to put things in perspective, right, is that one thing this is not is new, right? And the reason that's important to understand is if you think the monster in the room is one you've never seen before, right? You don't have any idea how to respond to it. You don't know how to fight it. It knocks you off balance precisely because you're trying so hard to just decipher what it is. But I want to suggest to you that the monster that stalks the country, which by the way is not a man, it's a movement, it's an ideology. It's not Trump, it's Trumpism, that there's nothing really new about it. And take heart in that, because if the monster isn't new, then our resistance doesn't have to be all that different. We just got to keep doing what folks have been doing, the very people who are chronicled in that museum that I'm honored to be a part of in that video, because they know how to fight monsters. And they've always fought monsters. And I'm fairly confident that if Bull Connor could not lay black and brown folks low, if Jim Clark in Selma could not lay black and brown folks low, if Lester Maddox in Georgia could not lay black and brown folks low, that Donald John Trump ain't going to be the one, y'all. So just know that. So let's understand Trumpism. And first, let's dispense with some of the nonsense, right? Because there are still a lot of people who would have us believe that everything I just said, however much it might be pretty rhetorically, that it isn't really fair because after all, it's not right of me to suggest that Trumpism is first and foremost a white nationalist project. That it's not, oh, I hadn't said that yet, but I just did. But that's not fair, Tim, because, these are folks who are first and foremost motivated by their economic anxiety. Here's how we know that that isn't true. Right? First, we know it's not true because if Trumpism were rooted mostly in economic anxiety, black and brown folks would have been lined up around the block to vote for him, right? Because when it comes to economic anxiety, people of color are the ones who always, both quantitatively and qualitatively, have a disproportionate share of it. African American folks, even who have a college degree, almost twice as likely as whites with a degree to be unemployed, regardless of major, by the way. Latino and Latina folks with a college degree, 50% more likely than whites with a degree to be out of work, regardless of major. Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders with a degree, 23% more likely than whites with a degree to be out of work. Our indigenous brothers and sisters, 2/3 more likely to be unemployed even when they have a degree relative to white folks. So if economic anxiety were the principal driver, this would have been a multicultural, multiracial movement, unprecedented in the history of America, and I think it is safe to say that that is not what we saw. That isn't to say economic anxiety isn't in the picture, though, right? See, this is the mistake we make in this country, I think, sometimes when we talk about class and race as separate phenomena, that we ignore that, yes, it was about economic anxiety, but only in relation to a backdrop of white supremacy and privilege. And what I mean by that is that white identity for hundreds of years, going back to the colonial period, has been about the connection symbolically of whiteness to a form of caste superiority, even when one's class position was wanting and lacking, right? In other words, it was the way to tell even the poorest white person that you're better than even the best off person who isn't designated as white. It was what W.E.B. Du Bois would later call the psychological wage of whiteness. And that is the coin of the realm in this culture and has been for a very long time, especially if you're suffering, right? Because if you're rich, this is redundant. Right? This skin, this is redundant. For Donald Trump, this is redundant, right? For Bill Gates, this is redundant. For anyone who has a whole lot of money, right? For those 38 people in this country who have the same net worth as the bottom half, because those are the numbers, by the way, this is redundant. But for the poor, white, Appalachian coal miner or assembly line worker in Pennsylvania, this is often all they got, and they will cash that check because this culture has told them that it has value. So that's our dilemma. It isn't that they don't suffer economic anxiety, it's that they suffer it, and by God, they weren't supposed to have to. Right? There's this thing called expectationalism, which I don't know if it's a thing, but it's a word. Maybe I made it up. I don't know. I like it. And one of the privileges and perks, I suppose, of being a white male is I can just make up words and get away with it. So I'm going to use that when it serves a positive function, right? Expectationalism, right, says to white folks, you are supposed to have the best of everything, but even if you don't, you'll at least always have this. So it isn't really shocking when a candidate for office would play on that. That's why I'm saying it's not new. It's not new at all. It's been around for a very long time. So it is about economic anxiety, but only against a backdrop of racial supremacy. Trumpism is predicated on a few things in particular that we've seen before. The first is, of course, nostalgia. It is first and foremost a nostalgic movement, right? That's why the hat says, "Make America Great Again," right? It doesn't say, "Let's make America great for the first time because we really haven't ever gotten it right before." Not only because that won't fit on the hat, but because the people who crafted the slogan wanted to appeal, much like the Tea Party did before them, to a nostalgic past. And I know a little something about nostalgia because, like I said, I'm from the South, and we do that with grits. Like, that is what we do, right? I mean, we had that song. You've heard the song, right? Wish I were in the land of cotton. Old times there are not forgotten. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. And if y'all think the South lost the Civil War, you haven't been paying attention. Right? Just telling you the truth. See, sometimes victories take a really long time to manifest and materialize, and folks go to sleep. But that's what we do. We do nostalgia. And the whole nation under Trumpism is gripped by that, the notion that once upon a time we were great. Now, they'll never tell you when you ask them when, right? Because I do that, because I'm pushy that way and obnoxious. And I'll say, well, when was it great? And they always are like, well, because they know any answer they give makes them sound like a jerk, right? They can't give a good answer they can't say the 50s, because then they're going to be like, oh yeah, wait, They can't say the 1911 like teens or something, because children are working in mines and factories. They know that sounds terrible, but in a way that's what they're thinking, right? That we want to go back to this age of supposed innocence when everything was wonderful. And so nostalgia makes up a big piece of it, and that's nothing new. The second thing Trumpism is predicated on is a backlash to real, or at least perceived gains, but often real gains made by people of color. If you want to understand what's going on in this country, it's one thing to come and listen to me, and I'm glad you're here, and I'm totally going to sell you books in a minute, so that's my subliminal. I'm a slick salesman like that. I just put it out there for you. But read mine for sure, but please read Carol Anderson's book. Carol Anderson, a brilliant scholar at Emory University, who wrote this book, White Rage, that came out about a year ago, maybe 15 months ago. It's a brilliant book. Because what she talks about, and she does it in only 148 or 172 pages or something, very quick, very brief, to the point, talking about how every single iteration of progress, specifically for black folks, but I think you can make the same analysis for peoples of color generally, every diminution of whiteness as power, every advance was met not just with the term backlash, which is almost a soft sell, right? But real rage, whether that was the rage that met the end of enslavement, right? The Reconstruction era met with intense hatred, and the resurrection of really slavery-like conditions for African-American folk throughout the South, a vicious resurgence of white supremacy, culminating, of course, in Jim Crow laws. When the Great Migration takes place and you have black folks moving north to escape conditions in the South, they are met with a significant rage in the Midwest and the Northeast and the industrial corridors of this country, overt racial pogroms. We call them race riots, but that doesn't do it justice, right? Racial pogroms, orgies of violence that meet these migrants looking for work, right? Again, some themes repeat themselves over and over in our history, as we see right now with the way that we treat migrant labor as well. White rage that met the Brown versus Board of Education decision, a kind of rage that led entire school districts to simply shut down their public schools in the South, create white flight, so-called Christian academies where the white folks could go and end black schools or black schooling after 5th grade or 7th grade or 8th grade. It was a form of real rage. We saw it culminate not only in the South, in places like Boston, right? And there were desegregation crises out here, as you well know. And so, right, West Coast, East, South, all around the country, that kind of rage which met progress. And of course, then that culminates even beyond the desegregation backlash with the response to affirmative action, the response to the Fair Housing Act, all kinds of backlash that we saw throughout the 80s. And then, of course, with the advances signified or symbolized by the presidency of Barack Obama, you get birtherism, you get the Tea Party, you get this I want my country back mentality, putting aside how concrete the gains for black and brown folks really were in the years of the Obama administration, and we can debate that. I personally think there's a lot, of course, that was left on the table, so to speak. I don't put that on him. I put that on us and him. All of us together had to do more, didn't do enough. But the point is, it certainly was symbolic of advance. It was symbolic of progress, and it was met with the same kind of rage. And so what we're seeing with Trumpism is what we saw in the 60s and the early 70s. It's what we saw in the 1920s and the 1930s. It's what we saw in the 1890s, the 1870s, the 1880s, even some of the same rhetoric, right? The rhetoric of white victimhood, right? The idea that we're the ones now, that's what all the surveys say, white folks are locked in this not only nostalgia for the past, but this real fear that we're the ones being victimized. Not only the polls tell us that, YouTube tells us, right? Because you can get on YouTube and you can see videos of some of these folks, right? This one guy, you saw him in the Starbucks. This white man melted down in a Starbucks, yelled at a black barista, called her everything but a child of God, used every possible racial slur, pointed out, I voted for Trump, like that was at all relevant to his latte purchase, right? but he apparently got bad service and wanted to let everybody know that, by God, I'm a Trump voter and you're and he uses the N-word, and it's all on video. And his point was that he feels oppressed because he got bad service at the Starbucks. Y'all, if you think that bad service at the Starbucks, like they put soy milk in and you ask for 2%, like if you think that that is oppression, you have just proven white privilege with a vengeance. Better than me or my books or Carol Anderson or her books or any person of color ever possibly could. Because if you think that's oppression, you don't know what oppression is. So thank you for the assist, in the pedagogical approach of what I'm trying to do. And there was the white woman in the Michaels in Chicago, right? Bought too much stuff to fit into the plastic bags that they give you. And so the black woman who was the clerk said, hey, we've got these, reusable, recyclable bags. It'll just be $1. Your stuff will fit in there better. And she goes ballistic, starts using racial slurs at her. Again, talks about being a Trump voter like it's relevant to her crafting or whatever she was doing with the stuff from Michael's. Once again, thinking that she's oppressed because they asked her to buy a $1 bag, y'all. A $1 bag was oppression. See, this is what Robin DiAngelo talks about as white fragility, right? This idea that we're just sort of like, and it's funny because these are the people that call progressives snowflakes, right? These are the people that, those of us who fight racism, well, you're snowflakes because you can't handle what, like you get triggered too easily, you think everything is racism. So we're the snowflakes. This coming from people who sort of lost their mind when they redid Annie with a black character, right? These are, they redid Annie with a black actress and Jamie Foxx, and it was like, you can't redo Annie. It's a classic. She's an orphan and she has red hair, and then they made Rue black in the Hunger Games, and we're like, oh, no. You can't do that. So, sort of interesting when you call someone a snowflake and you melt that easily. But that's sort of where white rage is. It's gotten to this absurdity, but it's always been there. It was Justice Joseph Bradley of the Supreme Court in 1883 who first coined the concept of sort of reverse discrimination against white people when he, along with his colleagues, threw out many of the Reconstruction era civil rights laws by saying that it was time for the Negro to stop being the special favorite of the law and join the rest of us as mere citizens, right? This is sort of ironic considering that up until a few years before, only whites could be citizens and were considered as such. But now all that special treatment, the Freedmen's Bureau, which lasted about a minute, and the Freedmen's Bank, which lasted about another minute, was too much favoritism. So again, this stuff has been around, and I want us to remember that because folks fought that then, and we don't have to be disheartened now. It's really not a unique moment. It just goes to show that, as I think we might all know, Donald Trump didn't really think of something new, right? This isn't some new stuff, right? It's a lot easier to fight the monster when you've seen him before. That's all I'm saying. The third thing that Trumpism is predicated on is this long-standing divide and conquer thing. Now, I think I probably talked about this last time I was here, and I looked at the video this morning because I don't want to repeat myself. But then Albert, my buddy, he says to me, Tim, when the Stones play, they still do Satisfaction. So I was like, okay, all right. Well, I'm not Mick Jagger, and y'all ain't paying me like the Stones, but if I did repeat this, if I am being repetitive here, it's because it's an important tune and an important note to hit, right? The history of the country is the history of rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. I mean, that's America sort of in a nutshell when it comes to race and class, right? If you had to put I don't know, it may be too many syllables for a haiku, but it's like basically if you had to come up with a very short phrase that you could, I don't know, maybe too long for a bumper sticker also, but it's the history of America is the history of rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. It begins in the colonial period, right, when whiteness wasn't even a thing yet. There was no white race. We didn't love each other. We spent most of our time in Europe killing each other. The English hated the Irish hated them back. Northern Italians didn't consider Southern Italians to even be Italians, right? The Germans hated everyone, and the feeling was quite often mutual, right? I mean, the history of Europe was sort of the history of killing one another and looking for the witch, alternately. That was the other thing we did a lot. We didn't consider ourselves one big happy family. But all of a sudden, in the middle of the 1700s, there becomes a need for this thing called the white race. Well, what changed, right? What changed was rich folks looked around, started counting, and realized they were heavily outnumbered. When you take African enslaved folks, European indentured servants, just one level above enslavement, when you look at other peasants in the European group who maybe weren't indentured, you put them together, they outnumber the elite, right? You had a handful of folks that owned all the stuff, and everybody else working for them. See, some things really don't change. 400 years on, we're back to that, right? And so they looked around and realized they had to figure out a way to get some of those poor Europeans on their team. They create the notion of whiteness, the white race, give out little perks here and there. You can enter into contracts, testify in court. You can vote, at least if you're male. We're going to put you on the slave patrol to keep those people in line, right? It's not real power. You know, you're on the slave patrol. You don't own the land, right? You know, and this is important in an era of police misconduct in our country to understand. This is the bright line of the first iteration of law enforcement was slave patrol, right? And black and brown folks know that. See, knowing your history is really important because I gather that a lot of white Americans don't know that history that stretches from slave patrols to the present. And if you don't understand that, and you don't understand the way in which black life has been discounted so regularly, then a phrase like, let alone a movement like Black Lives Matter won't make sense to you, right? And then you'll say things like, well, but what about my life? But all lives matter, don't I? But what about me? I know all lives matter, precious. I know. I got 2 white children. I know. You don't have to tell me that their lives matter. The problem is every police officer in America knows already. And every teacher in America knows, and every employer knows, and every bank loan officer knows that their lives matter and that their credit record probably won't. See, that's the difference, right? But if you don't know the history, including the slave patrol history all the way up to the present, lots of misconduct in the Los Angeles area. If you don't know enough about it, just watch, I think it was episode 2 of the 5-part OJ documentary on ESPN. You'll know all you need to know about the history of the LAPD.
Now, welcome back. Before I break down what I've just understood, Tim Weiss is a white and anti-racism educator and author who has spent decades challenging white privilege, systematic racism, and the lies that America has put out there. Unlike some so-called allies who place both sides, Tim Weiss doesn't water it down. So he tells white people the truth about their system, their privilege, and historical violence committed against black people. And a lot of black people have come out to support him. So I always listen to him. And in this, Tim Weiss says that Trumpism is the first and foremost a nostalgic movement. And that's why they had says, make America great again. Now, let me talk about that. When people romanticize the past, not because it was good for everyone, but because it was good for them. In this case, like for example, white folks who benefited from our oppression are longing for a time when their dominance went unchallenged, and that's what we call nostalgia. Now, make America great again is not a slogan. This is a dog whistle. It's a coded message. It says what? It says, remember when black people knew their place. Remember when we didn't have to share power. Remember when we were on top and no one questioned it. And that is what MAGA means. Because let me ask you, when was America great? Even some white people ask that question. MAGA means going back to where white people were in full of control, where segregation was obvious. And that's why he came up with policies to make sure that he's trying to erase the history, trying to bring back segregation, try to deport immigrants so that he can take full control of America, how it was back then. You see, this professor is calling it out, saying that this isn't patriotism. This is white supremacy dressed in nostalgia. And this is a warning to black people. Be very careful when white folks start dreaming of the past. Be very careful, because the past was not good for us. The past was never good for us. Do you know their dream back then was built on our nightmares? So we must be careful with that. Now, I will quote what Tim has said, that wish I were in the land of cotton. All times they are not forgotten. Look away, Dixieland. This is a southern song that Tim is referring to. And that's not just a song. That's a declaration. It says that we remember when things were good for us. But let's talk about what those old times actually were. It was times of slavery. It was times of black bodies in chains, when black women being, understand, and when black men being lynched and families torn apart. Those are not the days to remember for black people. But white people, Trumpism, want to go back to that. And these are the old times white America doesn't want to forget. And Tim, coming from the Southern himself, knows the culture of denial and delusion. And he's saying that you all didn't lose a war. Your ideology still runs this country. And that's a deep truth, because even through the Confederacy lost the battle, white supremacy won the war. It just changed clothes. When civil war or civil rights passed, white supremacy did not lose. It just changed clothes. If I connect the dots, I will say this. Trumpism is not just a fluke. Trumpism is not just about one person. It's a manifestation of what has been brewing in America for centuries. And that's why they say Trump did not create racism. It's just exposing how it is. Trump did not create all these lies, just exposing them out. Trump did not create white supremacy. He just spoke it out loud. And he gave voice to what many white people already believed. And that black people progress is a threat. And that equality means white people are losing. So that this country belonged to them, not us. And when he said, "Make America great again," millions of white folks heard that. And they understood the assignment. And that's why they went out there on 11th November and they voted massively for him. Maybe he could not be their choice, but because of the dog whistle, "Make America great again," who doesn't want America to be great again? Who doesn't want Africa to be great again? Make Africa great again. Make Africa great again. The days where we had Mali, the days where we had empires, Songhai, the days where we had our scientists, our architecture, the days of building the pyramid. Who doesn't want to go back there? The days that we had gold fooling us. Now, Trump gave a voice to many white people, already believe that black progress is a threat. And the equality means white people are losing. I've talked about that. And bringing back the days when the rule was unchallenged, the white rule was unchallenged. And that's why white people showed up in numbers, not because of policy, not because of jobs, but because he promised to recenter whiteness. Trumpism is just the wood taken off. It's the mask slipping. And what we see underneath is the same old anti-black hatred that has been there or has been here since 1619, way back. Now, Tim also exposes something deeper. White America will full blindness. They refuses to see the past clearly because it threatens their identity. If they admit the truth that America was built on slavery, genocide, and exploitation, then they will have to question everything, their wealth. We will question their institution, question their heroes, question their holidays, because they cling to lies. That's why they cling to lies. That slavery was a necessary evil, that black people should be grateful, that racism is over. And the delusion, or this delusion, is power, because it allows white people to be both oppressive and victims in their mind. It fuels movement like the Tea Party, MAGA, and now this rise of white nationalism. And family, this is so dangerous. When I think of it, I get it to be dangerous, because people who believe a lie will kill to protect a lie. I'm telling you the truth. If I'm wrong, tell me in the comment section. As black people, we should care what Tim Weiss is saying, because his words validate what we have been saying for centuries. But more importantly, it shows that the system is finally being exposed from within. And this is our time to push our narrative harder, build stronger communities, unite globally as a people. And let's educate our children. I say that always. Let's educate our children about the African history. The lie is cracking, but a cracked lie is still dangerous. That's why we must stay focused as black people, because now that they are losing the grip, they will come harder. Team message should empower us, not rely on allies, but recognize that the truth is breaking through. I'll say this, this new generation Z, or Generation Z, the young black folks, African youths, Caribbean minds, diaspora warriors, right now they are not buying the lie. We ain't buying that lie. We are waking up, rising up, and linking up from the social media across Togo, Ghana, Kenya. The youth are challenging white supremacy openly. They're calling names, exposing colonized education, reclaiming African identity. And Team Weiss speech is just one brick in a crumbling wall, but we are the ones kicking it down. This is not just about an American issue. It's a global, because white supremacy is global and black unity must be global too. Black unity must be global. Let me be clear. While we respect Team Weiss, as black people, we must remember to respect these people. Malcolm X said this. We must respect that. We must not forget that. Dr. John Heck Clark said this. Angela Davis said this. Baldwin shouted this. What makes Tim different is that he is white. He is talking from within, saying it to other white folks. And that has shocked the entire system. But we must never let our truth to be rebranded. That's why I say, let's tell our own story. We are not new in this. We are originators of this resistance. Our ancestors screamed this truth while being lynched. I'll say this. Let's use Tim Weiss. I share his clip. It's not because he's white, but I share because he has a message that he's passing out. But always let's bring home our heroes, because they have been saying this for so long. We must educate ourselves. We must strengthen black institutions and control our narrative for us to stay focused, unite across borders. From diaspora unity, we need that. From Caribbean to US to Africa to Brazil to all these countries, we need that. Tim Weiss did something powerful. He held up a mirror to white America, and what they saw scared them, because sometimes the truth needs to be told from within so that you can get it loud and clear. Because behind the MAGA hat, the flag waving and the slogans, there's something deep. Lies, Asian fear, that black people will rise, that we will remember, we will reclaim. But guess what? We are doing that. We are waking up, we are building, we are connecting. Let them have their nostalgia, let them cling to the lie, but we are writing new future as black people. Thank you so much for tuning in, my family. Until next episode, peace out.